Well, hello everyone and welcome to this Legends podcast, coming to you from Tokyo and Zushi with the amazing Angela Ortiz, who has an absolutely fascinating story. I'm so delighted to introduce her. Hi, Ange.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's it must be the hottest day of the year so far today. Is it warm in Tokyo?
Very, very warm.
Uh-huh.
I just did one quick jaunt to the convenience store and back, and
Yeah, and you're done. Yeah, I'm going to the beach later and I'm hoping it's going to have cooled down by 2 o'clock, but I'm not 100% hopeful. So here we are. It's August the 10th. We're in Japan. Whenever you're watching or listening to this, we're right in the middle of the COVID Corona 2020 pandemic. So we've been working from home a lot. So maybe there's probably people milling around in our backgrounds here because we're at home quite a lot right now. And so let me get into it. So Angela Ortiz is an incredible woman, a great friend who I adore, and I just want to tell you a little bit about her. So she is a social impact entrepreneur, and she was raised in Japan. She's one of 11 brothers and sisters, which is pretty remarkable in itself. She is currently the CSR director,
senior manager.
CSR senior manager for Adidas Japan. She previously worked for H&M as their CSR manager. The first one, right?
That's true. Yes, first one in the Japan market.
Following the 2011 earthquake here, the Great Eastern Earthquake here in Japan, Angela set up a business called a social impact business called OGA for Aid, which then became Place to Grow, which then became the title of her book, which we will talk about later, which was published very recently. She is a Spartan, a self-confessed nerd. She has her own program called Bootylicious, which is all about getting great buns. And today, Ange, I just invite you, and I invite everybody out there who's listening or watching, to just speak as you are. There's no need to dumb it down or bring it up. Just be yourself. Speak as you speak. I'll speak as I speak with my vaguely Liverpudlian accent. And let's just get into it. Was there anything that I missed off your introduction there, Ange?
Other than being also an incredible coffee lover.
Oh, a coffee lover. Well, kampai.
Yeah,
coffee
and
kampai.
Just recently I spoke to my grandmother who lives in Texas, and my aunt and my mom. They invited me into their weekly chat. Found out that my grandmother also drinks 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day. So we were all like, oh, we're so similar.
Isn't that nice? Do you keep in touch regularly with your grandma?
No. So it's been a long time, and so it was really special. But
yeah.
I'm going to now have weekly dates to with questions about where they were from and what are their earliest memories, to find out more about the characters of my ancestors. So I'm really excited.
Oh, wow.
The impact the women had on the next generation of women.
Yes, he mentioned this in a recent communication with me. So this is really interesting to me, Ange, and I actually want to go here. So I was going to ask you about your childhood, but actually we've gone beyond that into the ancestry. And I'm sure that in your line of work, in your social impact work, that you must have heard of the concept of 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. So these things are very interesting to me, that the things we do today, I think there's other versions of this, which is if you plant a tree today, knowing that you will never see it in its full fruition, then you're truly, working for the planet, or fill in the blank, your ancestry. So it's very interesting to me to frame everything through the lens of 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, which is, I understand, an indigenous kind of concept. And I know that the traditions of Japan also have this inherent in them, which is, for example, a temple, you have to plan 1,000 years ahead, because the tree that will support the pagoda or the central needs 1,000 years to grow.
Wow.
And these concepts are so interesting. So the reason I'm saying this is I've just created, you can't see it here, but a little altar. I've never been like this at all. Of course, the Japanese always have a butsudan in the house, which honors the ancestors. But I've just put a couple of photographs of my grandmas on there, specifically my grandmas. And just as part of this learning that I'm doing at the moment about like indigenous cultures and the effects of colonialism and so on. So these concepts are really interesting to me. So I didn't know this about you, but you've just invited this into our conversation. So tell me more about this. Tell me more about this ancestral connection.
So it was just it was a brief conversation, but I've always been interested in this. And this also came about after a talk I read by Sir Ken Robinson, who I actually mentioned, I want to talk about later, but he talks about how it's an absolute miracle that each of us are alive.
Yeah.
The amount of connections that had to have happened thousands of years ago with your great-great-great-great-great-grandma meeting, your great-great-great-great-grandpa. And then when you think about all the chance meetings that might not have happened, but did, and that ended in the unique expression of this human being, is so powerful. And I've always been interested in where we came from, because
yeah,
a third country, like as immigrants, you know, you're not surrounded by that. So my grandmother always sent us birthday cards with a $20 bill, and she has, like, you know, hundreds of grandchildren. So it always struck me as like, wow, she's a very diligent person to remember all of our birthdays. And then through asking stories, so rather than just asking names and dates of birth, which give you a lineage, right, like a record, when you ask stories, you get insights into these people's characters. So I found out that my great-grandfather didn't like his first name, Walter, so he changed it to James. I have French in me, and my great-grandfather, changed the spelling from Jordan, which is Jourdan, to Jordan, which is more American. So you would not have known that, right? But through asking these questions, I found out, like, when my grandmother first moved from Louisville, Kentucky to Texas, first thing she did was buy a pair of Levi jeans. My aunts are like, and you look so good in those jeans. And you see this humor going back and forth. And for me, it's just really lovely. So my ancestry goes all the way back to Spain on my father's side, specifically the area of Basque. And they came over to South America. And then on my mother's side, it's French, German, English, Irish.
Yeah.
Everyone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I will be looking into this more.
Interesting. So you're going to start collecting the stories. Like, story collection is so useful, so amazing. My dad actually made a book for us with all the family photos he could find. He was going all over England collecting stories and photographs from people, like knocking on the doors of farms and stuff and going, hello, I'm your blah 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 cousin X removed, tell me about Auntie Peggy or whatever. And so I've got this incredible book that he made there with all the family lineage stuff in as far back as he could possibly go.
That's really,
but my grandma
really cool.
started telling stories when she was dying as well. Like, you know, she revealed to us that her mother hadn't actually died when she was 2, that she actually had just gone when she was born, you know. So it's like, oh, that like rejigs your, you know, rejigs your whole, like, what? So interesting. It's like,
yeah, for me, the really interesting part is, especially in my line of work and with what I did with Tohoku and the recovery, I know in my book especially I talk a lot about connections. Yes. I think when you look into your ancestry, that's essentially what you're finding is the stories of connections. And then, of course, along with that come all these anecdotes that give you into their personal characters, their humor or lack of humor. So it's really, really interesting.
What's the most interesting discovery you've made so far, Ange?
One of the most fascinating was to find out that on my Colombian side, my grandmother, we call her abuela, she is the youngest of 24 children, 2 mothers, And one of her earliest memories is when she was 4, was the funeral of her father.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you connect to that?
Well, she told a story of how they kept his ashes in like a special jar in one of the family rooms. And she was told not to go in there because the ghosts of, the ancestors might be around. And she said when she was 9 years old, she walked in there at night and dared the ancestors to come forward. And I'm meeting this woman, I've only met her twice in my life. And the second time she came all the way to Tokyo when she was 92. And she's telling us this story, and I'm just sitting there going like, my God, Abuela, you are a gutsy woman. And I remember when I met her at 15 as well, like the way she danced with everyone. Of course, she's much older, but she took a shot of aguardiente and started dancing. She was very much this amazing, powerful character. However, because she grew up in the times that she did, the 50s, the 40s, you didn't see that side of women. Mm. So I talk about this later around my own relationship with my mother and how I didn't get to see this side of her until much later as well. Mm. One thing I think that's very interesting about women connections is that oftentimes you don't really find these connections until you're also an adult, and not like a young adult, like, I'm 30.
No.
So you find these stories out later, and then it's brilliant to see. I see a lot of elderly women really tight, like, with their daughters and their sisters. And I think that's something to really look forward to.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something there, Ange, which is maybe we start to relate much more easily to the women in our lineage once we are the age we remember them. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So like you look in the mirror one day and you see yourself, you're like, oh wow, I really look like my mom. And then, or my grandma, and you think, oh wow, they were like I don't know what to say about that, but that's what I noted.
And I think also it's because having been through a good few years, like decades of your own life, you start to connect with the word journey maybe, and you realize, oh, it's far more fluid and evolving than you thought. And then you realize, oh, it's like that for them as well. They weren't just these like, photos or these statues that you put up on a pedestal as a child, and it's just everything changes, and it's really
it's like the DNA starts throbbing. Do you know how many cousins I have, Ange?
How many?
0. No cousins.
Wow.
I know. Unbelievable. Spoiled rotten by the grandparents.
So that's, my daughter is so excited about being an only daughter for that very reason. But yeah, she's a lot of cousins.
She'll get everything. Okay, so then let's move on then to your family of origin then. This incredible tribe you have there. Mm. Tell me about that then. So you're one of 11 brothers and sisters, and you were raised in the countryside in Japan. So tell us about your childhood and how that shaped you.
So the very first memories I actually have are in Japan. Although I was born in California, we moved here when I was about 3 or 4. My youngest brother was just a baby. Mm-hmm. And 5 children, my parents moved to Japan. And we were waiting for our housing to be settled or to be confirmed. And so we spent, I don't know how long it was, but my earliest memories are of camping around like Mount Fuji area. And I would remember like eating on a park bench. We would be having like granola out of paper cups, and my mom would be teaching us to read, and we would just then go running off into the mountains. So I have a lot of fun and really fond memories of adventuring, riverside camping. My dad's really into outdoors, and he got that from his father, fishing. And so now what really brings us together as a family, even though my siblings and I are scattered across 3 different continents, is the outdoors. So I'm going up tomorrow to my parents' house, and the conversation is fishing. Shall we build a pizza oven? Who's got the beef? It's all about food and just kind of time spent together. And really shaped, I think, my values Also, growing up in a foreign country, it was often difficult for me to integrate because I was homeschooled as a child. Although halfway through my adolescence, we moved to another rural town, even more rural. And so some of my siblings went into Japanese school and they integrated, and they have a very different life experience.
Okay.
Even though we're like one family unit, you know, there's the oldest is 21 years different from the youngest. And so they will have completely different childhood memories to share. But just to get more specific, it was like, so mom was always having children. Age of 8, you kind of drafted into the family cleanup schedule. So from 8 years old, you had to choose one breakfast a week to cook, the dog to walk, or one sort of chore that you needed to partake in. I remember, like, I taught my youngest brother, I taught him to eat, use a spoon. I taught him to read. I taught him like just different aspects of education. I remember babysitting one of my younger sisters for 2 weeks while my parents went to visit their parents back in the States. And then my youngest sister, of course. So you have such complex and unique relationships with every single sibling. Not to mention, you look like some of them, but you have the temperament of another. So it's really interesting. And a lot of drama.
So Ange, that's, yeah.
Yes, but along with the drama comes a lot of like the positive side of passion. Like, we're really tight, and it's a really loving family. For all the fights, there's a lot of love. And that's really, I think that shaped my identity growing up, because I didn't feel necessarily like a local. And of course, I had a lot of like Hafu friends growing up. And I distinctly remember, I think I was 9 years old. I distinctly remember walking down the street with my girlfriends. I think another one was a foreign, and 2 of them were half Japanese and one was full Japanese. And we saw a white, I think it was a Mormon. Back then, the only other foreigners were Mormons or English teachers. And we were like, ah, gaijin da. And I remember going, wait a second, I think I'm gaijin. Like, boom.
Wait a second. So just for the purpose of, there's a couple of questions I have here. So the first one's just an informational question, Ange, which is, can you just describe Hafu for us, just in case there's anybody out there who doesn't know what that means? And also, like, what does that mean in the context of living in Japan as well? What you just described there? Because it might sound a bit odd to somebody who's not used to hearing that language, whereas I am.
And this is really, really interesting, because in Japan, Hafu means half Japanese, half another race, any other race, right? White, black, yellow, doesn't matter. But it's got its own connotation. It's got its own, like, you're a secondary citizen depending on where you're living in Japan, or different. You're not fully Japanese, therefore we don't know exactly how to integrate you. We don't know how to accept you. Strange thing is that from being from the States, like, I'm Hafu because I'm half Colombian, half American. But then growing up in Japan, they don't recognize that, because you're all just foreigners. You're all just, and the kanjis for that is outside. So you're literally someone from outside. So I didn't grow up thinking I was Hafu. I just grew up thinking I was Colombian American. Sure, it was one thing. But for half Japanese, half foreigners, they have a very different experience when it comes to integrating and being accepted in Japan.
Yeah, and that will have a lot to do with their phenotype, like how they look, and whether they have a preference for Japanese or the other language in the household. And is that Absolutely. How come you have some kind of simpatico then, that kind of, all the outsider people tend to kind of group together? Is that what your experience was?
This is true, yeah, because you seem to have more in common. And I think, for example, for my parents, gravitating to other immigrant parents or mixed racial, like the wife was Japanese or the husband was foreign, vice versa. There's a lot of both. But I think also it was a bit more difficult for some of the Hafus who maybe spoke English as their first language and also themselves didn't quite fit into the Japanese local community, look Japanese. So there's a lot of expectations on them from the neighbors, for example, to know the dance that is Japan. I call it a dance because it's a very complex culture, and it's like everybody knows these steps and they didn't learn them. They just, it was imprinted upon them as they grew up by the culture and the activities and everything. And then as a foreigner, you might learn the language, but you never learn the steps of this dance. And so you're constantly like messing up. It's like if you've been invited to this waltz and you're the only one that doesn't know when to spin on time. And then instead of going, oh, let's teach you, they just kind of go, oh, let's just move over here. Sometimes. Yeah, because people don't know they don't know what you don't know, and they don't know how to describe that sometimes. Interesting. Yeah. What do we call you? Hybrid.
Yeah.
Weird hybrid creature.
Weird hybrid creature. Which sounds awful, Ange, but that was quite a liberating moment for you, wasn't it?
It really was. I just feel bad about never fitting in, and it was so stressful. And even the fact that I'm a young, or I was a young mother, and so friends my age had no children. Women who had children my age were 10, 15 years older than me, and so there was just like almost, it felt like from every which way you look at me, I just don't have a space that feels like I belong. Like there was no little box I could jump into.
No.
Like, here I am. And everyone goes, oh, yes, we get you.
Yeah.
So then
I hear you.
I hear you. Quite a lovely, it was very like, it was just like, oh, okay, fine. I'll just be that.
It's so interesting you should say that, because even just last night I was sitting around, like we're always in multicultural situations, right? That's our whole lives, and that's our karma. That's who we are. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I was sitting around a table with lots of lovely people last night, and I was thinking, I feel like these all got a memo on how to communicate, and I didn't get the memo. And I'm kind of sitting there like that, going, oh. And then when the group gets a bit smaller, then I can relax a bit, because then it's like I'm not. You're not like twitching around looking for the social cues and what where am I? Do you relate to this?
Absolutely. Like a lot, well, definitely myself, but I feel like a lot of the foreign culture around, for example, just as an example, in the corporate setting, in a creative performing, it's for every 5 bad ideas comes the great good idea. And I'm happy to be the first one to throw out all the bad ideas. But oftentimes that is not understood by my colleagues. And so they just kind of look at me as like, And then it puts them on this sort of defensive communication thread where they're just like, yeah, but that won't work because of this, and this won't work because of this. And I was like, okay, yeah, we didn't get the same memo of how to communicate on this. And that can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
But let me tell you one more interesting story about my child.
Go on.
I found just, I don't know, it was a bit of as a very young child. So my mother, she's had 11 children, but the first was quite complicated, and it was a cesarean. And then the second, the eldest daughter, she had to be delivered by forceps, so also quite complicated. And then the third son was also a cesarean. And the doctors told my mother, you should not have any more children. Like it's quite dangerous. And then I was her first natural birth. And she always used to tell, because, as kids, we're all crowded around, like, just tell us stories. And she would often talk about, the different aspects of us as young children. I just remember going, yes, the first natural birth.
I'll have that. I'll have that.
I'll have that, yeah. And then afterwards, she went on to have, 8 more children.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, where are you in the birth order?
I'm number 4.
And how do you think you're number 4? And how do you think, and who are you? So basically, with 11 kids, it's basically like a classroom. And having been in so many rooms, I can pretty much walk into a room these days and scan it and know who's who.
Wow.
I mean, that's you know, I
your
taught for
superpower.
about 4 years. I was a teacher for 4 years. It's not, I don't think it's a superpower. It's not like some kind of incredible intuition. It's just when you've been in enough classrooms, you know, like, okay, that's the popular person. That's the person who leads the atmosphere of the class. If that person's a really cool team player or somebody quite unusual, it's all good. But if that person's the bully, it's a different kind of classroom that you're in. And, you know, it's just like, you can kind of scan the room. So in your 11 person family, you were number 4, the first natural birth. And you were, who are you in this family?
So I think I am a bit of the peacemaker. Young child, for example, I intuitively, maybe it was because I was very curious about people, that I knew like how to talk to my father, for example, if we wanted to get something and to say, whereas my older sister would just like butt head on, always she had to be the same, like aggressive way. She didn't know any other sort of persona to put on. And for me, I just was like, well, Paula, that clearly doesn't work. So they would always be like, and you go ask dad. And I would, you know, be the messenger kind of. But then I think because of that role, I also became a bit of a follower. So I idolized the brother right above me. Like him and I were really close, and he played a big part in my becoming, I think, a strong woman. Like I never ever felt less of a person because I was a girl.
Same.
I have an older brother and a younger brother, so I'm kind of locked between the brothers, and I was very adventurous, just like them. Surprise, surprise. And they never once said, "Oh, Ange, don't do that." They always just turned around and were like, "Can you do it? Are you gonna do it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna jump too." And so, and because we were very adventurous, like always running off to parks, building forts, you know, climbing things, I think as a young child that gave me a sense of, well, I can be just like you. Then the other important lesson I learned actually from that funny story of my mom, you know, being told not to have any more children and then me being born, was that, okay, so just because people tell you to do something clearly does not make them right. And I remember that was a small sort of lesson that imprinted on my brain, which later on in years, I think I've really come to find value and foundation in.
That's so interesting, Ange. That a piece of your puzzle just fell into place for me there as well, because like you're so bold. And maybe because you were homeschooled as well, then you didn't get socialized as well quite as much. And also because you're an outsider. And one thing that's great about being a foreigner in Japan is that you get a lot of leeway, right? You get a lot of you get quite a lot of breadth in terms of cultural faux pas and mishaps. It doesn't matter how long you've been here. You know, people still see you as a tourist. It is what it is. You know, yes. I'm not weeping in the corner about that anymore. But I love it. And how interesting that you ended up working at Adidas, whose one of their catchphrases was "Impossible is nothing."
Nothing, yeah.
Right? What's
even more interesting is Adidas was like my childhood favorite brand.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
I remember when some of the girls in my class who were quite wealthy and snobby, and they came back with their fancy Nike trainers, and I was always, and my feet are kind of large for a girl, and it was always a point to like, I was so embarrassed about it. But then my brothers and I, like, we would get the Adidas discounts store from the thrift shop, etc. And I was like, yeah, this one's way more cool. Adidas is more edgy. I'm gonna wear this brand. And so I'm really, really happy to be now supporting their efforts in what is my sort of like dream career.
Right. Awesome. So what else do we need to know about your childhood? I mean, it's fascinating. I could go on and on. What brought you to Japan as a family?
My parents are massively adventurous people. That's honestly all I can come up with.
Yeah.
They like, when my mom turned 60, she bought a motorbike, and now they go off touring. And so going back to what I said about how I honestly, as a young child, I did not relate to my mother at all. I felt a disconnect, and I felt a little bit even resentful that I didn't want to be a mother, first of all. Like I didn't have a lot of maternal instincts. I was a bit masculine and like, oh yeah, I'm gonna travel and I'm gonna see the world. And I had all these ideas. And I was like, Mom, what were you doing? You were just following dad around, having babies. And then years later, a conversation with my mom, I suddenly was like, wait a second. The only reason you would have done that is if you yourself wanted to travel around the world and have a lot of babies. And there must have been an alignment there. And it just, it occurred to me that she's quite an adventurous, very, very strong woman.
What happened when you had that epiphany?
I think I just was able to connect with her and have fun with her and celebrate just her as Judy. And that's been so wonderful. And then I started noticing all these other amazing things about her. Like, I don't remember her ever being sick. Ever. Like, she's just the strongest woman I know.
Yeah, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? To be sick with 11 kids in your
I would
mind you, you said you all look after each other as well, which is also a great skill to acquire, I think, early on. That kind of taking care of each other thing. I think it must be quite humbling in a way, because you're not the center of the world for those parents.
Yeah, I felt often not neglected, but just sort of, there wasn't much attention. And because I was quite a self-capable girl, like I mentioned, like I was the peacemaker, and I was just got on. I was not very finicky about what was happening. And later I came to understand why, and I now really treasure this value. But as a young child, I felt like only the naughty children got the attention. Like, so, and I was just one of those, just get on with it. Okay, whatever, let's all just go. And so when I turned 7, my mom took time out just to take me down to the 7-Eleven, because back then the 7-Elevens would have like the full Baskin Robbins style ice cream scoopers. So you could get like a proper like 31 flavor at a 7-Eleven. And we had a lovely time, like 1 hour. She just took me for a walk. So I have these small memories. I remember riding the Romansuka, which was the first trains in Japan.
Like first class,
yeah. Me to read. He bought me an orange juice. Like, I have all these strange, just tiny, like colorful, like scenes in color. But then as they continued to have children, you felt like the lost middle child. Often I did.
I love what you said there, that once you had that epiphany about your mum, you were able to connect and have fun and celebrate Judy for Judy. Have you been able to do that for yourself?
Very good question. I think yes.
People pay me for this.
Yes. My goodness. But it has been quite recent. I'm not going to lie. But now I love myself.
I know, and I was so thrilled to see you last week delivering something that we'll talk about later, an online seminar for a group called Make March Matter, which was just so fantastic, and it was such a great moment for me as one of your peers to watch this strong, steady voice, because that's what unapologetic. You said something about, you said like you were really proud of yourself at one point, and I was like punching the air, so happy that you didn't mitigate it or put it down or any of that stuff. I was just like, yes, I was so happy. It made me so happy, I can't even tell you. So let's move on further into your story then. So you said you didn't want to have children, you didn't feel any maternal instincts, and then
what's the first thing I do as a young adult? Bam. Get pregnant. Yeah, so I was so as you mentioned, like I was homeschooled, right? So I finished high school around 17, actually, so quite early. And then decided to do some traveling, and I went to India, and One thing that really excited me about India, when we were talking about boxes earlier,
Mm-hmm.
there were no boxes to fit in, because in developing countries, like there are still so many open gray, and a lot of these are ugly spaces. But for me, having only known developed country and Japan, you know, clean and precise and like efficient and everybody knows what to do, I was just like, what is this glorious place where if I wanted to go from A to B, first of all, the buses probably wouldn't be on time, but second of all, I could just go have a conversation with somebody,
Yeah.
pay them, get there. I just felt like, my God, I could just live however I wanted and get things done. And it was also another sort of like mind-boggling moment for me. And I had a lot of valuable experiences there, which I later use in my my career in social impact. But I came back, and my first real relationship led to me being pregnant at 19. So there I was, and I was devastated. I'm not gonna lie. And I've had these conversations with my daughter already, and that's why like I feel I'm happy to share this, but I felt like I was just about to start my life, and now I have to start it for another person, not for me. Like, yeah, it was really emotionally devastating, and I just cried and cried. I couldn't even tell my dad. I was so embarrassed, and my father was horrified, called me irresponsible. And yeah, my sister had to tell him for me. And I was just like, I couldn't look him in the eyes. I was just crying. But you know, like my parents were religious, and my boyfriend at the time was also religious. So I just knew an abortion was not on the table. And I don't know that I wanted one, but I know that the fact that I didn't have a choice really left me feeling hopeless. Like, now I have to do something that I don't even get a choice in. And I blocked it out. So I had 3 different jobs at that time, and I just worked and worked until one day I felt the baby move, and you feel like what are like butterflies. And oh, that's weird. You know, honestly, in hindsight, I feel a bit sad because I should have enjoyed it more. It is such an amazing experience. And then giving birth was like, holy fuck, what is going on? I did not tell this body to do this. And so the birth experience was also like less traumatic, more fascinating. I was just going, oh my God. And it was horrendously painful. I am not going to lie. But then this thing was born, and I was just like, okay, let's get on with it. Took me 2 weeks to give her a name.
You read my mind. How did you choose her name?
You know, I didn't.
What's her name?
Her name is Antonia.
What does it mean?
Ortiz. Antonia means precious in Latin.
Oh
no, sorry, priceless. It means priceless in Latin. And I'd gone through thousands and thousands of names, and we were coming up on the 2-week deadline in Japan where you have to name them. And my father printed out I think it was 1,000 baby names, and I was flipping through it, and suddenly I saw Antonia. It was the first time I'd seen Antonia in a baby book name, and I was like, aha, that's it. I just knew. And
do you have any brothers called Anthony?
Nope.
Do you have any ancestors with the name?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of.
No. But I always felt like she was just quite a unique thing.
It's a strong name, Antonia, I think.
It is, right?
It's a really, like, it's got power behind it.
And she is that way. She was from just day one. She knew what she wanted to do, when she wanted to do it. And I struggled so hard just to keep up. You know, she started walking at 8.5 months. I was looking at her baby, which is very, very early. And I was looking at her baby book the other day, and one of the funny things that we wrote about her when she was 4 was that she would get in trouble in preschool because the teachers would tell her to write her alphabets the way we all recognize alphabets. And her response was, I want to write them the way I want to write them. What? She was just always that way. And so for me, being quite an easygoing person, like a lot of, like, I had to read and figure out and fail over and over to try and, you know, what is the role of a mother? How do I teach her certain things without smothering her, you know, without taking away that unique, like, fire and energy that makes her her, even though it's really difficult for our relationship. I always felt that, you know, well, if you're going to have a kid, you should have a long-term strategy of what is your end goal. You know, a lot of people go, oh, I want a baby. And I'm like, well, they're only babies for, you know, less than a year. Your job is to raise them from fetus to adult. What's your strategy to do that? So I think my kind of having gone through the emotional, and I say trauma because it was traumatic to find out at 19 that I was pregnant and that my entire life that I was looking at was now completely gone. Well, this is what I have to do now. So I'm going to do it.
And I suppose there was no blueprint either, because the way that your parents had parented was going to be vastly different from the way that you were going to enter parenting. Because you've been a solo parent for a long time now. That's
always.
Right? Always.
Almost always, yeah. We lived, so I did get engaged and we tried for about 11 months.
Yeah.
But I was still having to take on part-time work during that time. And you know, the relationship didn't work out and I moved back to my parents and got another job. And so it's just always been her and I, basically. But it does take a village to raise a child. And I was very close to my older brother's family. And we definitely were the unabashedly, unapologetic third wheel in the family. We were always tagging along. I also was aware that girls need father figures. I feel like it's very important, but it doesn't need to be your biological father. You need a role model. It could be a grandfather, it could be an uncle, it could even be a neighbor. You just need to have a relationship and that connection, I think. And of course, I learned what I'm speaking about now. I learned this in hindsight. So this was not my 20s motherhood experience. This was like after the fact, after I started learning all these different things, I tried to obviously try to always get better, right?
Yeah, I mean, but you are a lifelong learner, and I think that's, well, you say obviously, it's not that obvious, and not everybody does that, and not everybody is a reflective learner in that way or a reflective learner in that way at all. So I'd really enjoy you taking ownership of that as something that's uniquely you, to look back, because the way you just told that story, it's as if this was unfolding in your 20s. This is unfolding in the last X years since you've had a bit more headspace, because once your kids become less dependent, tell me where I'm wrong, I noticed that maybe about 8 years old or maybe 10, you are able to kind of re-embody your adulthood in a different way. Depends, case by case.
No, absolutely. These phases happen, right? Like, so I remember after she was born, clearly physically there's so much to do, right?
Like keep a baby alive.
And then around like 2, 3, I remember having a conversation with my sister-in-law going, and like I was like, you know what, I feel like I'm babysitting now. Like, what am I supposed to do? Because my sister-in-law was like reading books to her son and flashcards, and I was like, honestly, I mean, like, I know this makes me sound like a horrible mom, but I don't find that fun. Like, I'm not waking up in the morning like, flashcards on the potty with my kid. And I felt so guilty about it for so long. And after a while, I knew it was not making me a better parent. I knew the guilt was actually, if anything, making me a worse parent, but I couldn't break out of it. And also I had a lot of shaming from certain people who I was really close to, and that deeply affected my sense of self-esteem and my, and then also the fact that I knew in the back of my head, like no one else knew this, right? In the back of my head, I knew that deep down, I didn't want to get pregnant. And that guilt followed me for about a decade and a half.
Wow. And how did you get to the point where you were able to tell the truth about that to yourself and then move beyond it?
Yeah, so that kind of change in my whole mindset happened in my early 30s through working through a completely different sort of challenge in my life. I identified around, I think I was 30, just 30, when I identified that I had an eating disorder.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was through the growth of that I was able to sort of rethink everything in my life. And alongside that, losing the guilt around being a parent was something I was able to overcome.
Beautiful. And so through that, you did therapy, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So actually, I don't know if many other people relate to this, but when I was like 16, 17, obviously I'm Colombian by ethnic background, which equals certain physical attributes, and American, right? And a lot of my Japanese friends are very different physique-wise. And I, of course, grew up comparing to them and didn't feel happy. I didn't like my body. I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't like the way my mind worked because I was always asking questions, and I just really hated myself when I was 17. But around the time, you know, a lot of girls were doing the whole like, oh, you just throw up afterwards, it's fine, you look, you know. So, you know, that had happened a couple times, and often it became an incredible pattern. But I still didn't think I had a problem. You know, it was just something we did once in a while. All girls do it, right? And then starting the charity in Tohoku, it kind of like, it went away. And I was like, yeah, it's because now I have purpose and I'm excited for the first time in my life. But then to my horror and shock, it came back. And I was like, what? No, what? This is not supposed to happen. Why is this happening again? And I got really, well, of course I was devastated again. And I was like, okay. And one day I looked online and I suddenly saw that millions of other women have this problem. And I just burst into tears and I started crying and crying. And then I remember I told my best friend, I was like, I think I have a problem, you know, and she was just like, yeah, Ange, it's okay. I sometimes, you know, anyway, we're best friends. And so that's like that big hug she gave me kind of gave me the courage to then go explore. And of course, again, as I said, okay, once I know something to be true, I have to follow it. So, and I was like, there's no way I can exist with this. And also my daughter was 9 at this time, and I was scared that she would overhear me or that she would on it. And I would never wish an eating disorder on my worst enemy. It is the most horrendous mental and emotional stress that you could imagine. And so I decided to get help. And I went to like Eating Anonymous, 12-step things. And they were all there doing their best, but they were coping. No, not one of them could tell me that they had overcome it. And I was like, no, I cannot live with this. I have to find a way to not have this. So long story short, I eventually did find, he was a diet coach, and he helped people lose weight by understanding that there's some emotional connection, probably in your childhood or in your past, that has created an emotional connection between you and what you do when you are binging and purging. There's many different types of eating disorder, and I had bulimia.
Right.
And so he put me through exercises of self-analysis. We did what they call mindfulness journaling, and he helped me go, he's like, Ange, you cannot do this if you're shaming yourself every single second you're writing this. So I had to actually practice observing my behavior without shame and letting it happen. And in total, it took about 3 years. But eventually what I was able to do was identify the core trauma, address it, not to the people that were involved in that trauma. Like I didn't even need to go and talk to those persons. I just needed to have a space to say that and to let that part of myself be heard. And when I was a young mom, struggling financially, emotionally through all of this, my coping mechanism was to sort of let the very tough side of my personality become my obvious personality. So the way I saw myself, the way I approached problems was very much, oh, fuck it, just do it. So it was very like old school. It's like men from the 1940s and 50s, like just repress your emotions and get on with it. But because of that, there was obviously a side of me that was not being heard, that was not in balance, that was not there. And the course of my therapy with this gentleman helped me realize that there was a very vulnerable and delicate and girly side of me that I had never allowed to be expressed. And luckily, so now I'm so grateful for this eating disorder because, I approached my parenting in that way too. I was with Tony very like tough and rough and like, well, who cares that, you're struggling because, maybe she was sad about her father not being there. And, that's a whole other story. But I didn't allow her to be sad, to address those emotions. And so through a course of many, many conversations and time and just more time and learning to be okay with the mistakes and the vulnerabilities and all the things that my 17-year-old self hated about me, I came out of that and I remember thinking it was like going into a pool or a lake, and this side of the lake was filled with that thick, disgusting algae, disgusting, you would never go. But on the other side was like bright blue, clear waters. And it felt like I had to wade through all this, and it was like tears and just, oh my God, I cannot express how overwhelming and disgusting it was. But then one day you kind of wake up and there's like this, oh, this water's clean. Oh my God, I'm breathing for the first time without this emotional weight on my shoulders. And then you start swimming faster and faster. And then before you know it, you're on this other side of like, whoa, this is what it feels like to enjoy these arms, this face, this body, this life that I have. And then I looked at everything so differently. And from that mindset, I just continued to, of course, fail forward, but I don't know, it was definitely dark and black and white, a journey that once the other side, I look back and I could see kind of fuzzy in the horizon, all that gunk I was talking about, and just going like, ha!
In your face, gunk!
In your face! I did it!
That's an absolutely amazing story, Ange. I had so much emotion rise then. I had so much emotion rise when you said that you saw all these. The first one, I had goosebumps all over my body when you said there were all these women there, other girls there, and you were like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. And it seems so obvious, but I just think to myself, where are those? It reminds me of the vulnerability piece. You mentioned the word vulnerability there. I don't want to kind of hook too much into the vulnerability thing, but Brené Brown says, we need to get our secrets out where we can see them. And that, she's the author of The Power of Vulnerability. And I think you've beautifully described that there. It's like you have to kind of, it's that you said it was there, it was always on your back, that guilt or whatever it was, but when you get it out where you can see it. And then you found this great guy who did the diet thing and a therapist. So then when you've got somebody who's a trusted professional to work with that with you, that's also just so useful too. And then you're able to pass that on. And this is you calling it fail forward. I know this is one of your favorite concepts, but and also this gratitude for your disorder, for showing you this, and the metaphor of the algae and then the clear blue waters. And I think often when we're on the edge of that, we talk about edges a lot, but when you're on the edge of that, it could probably feel quite people will often go back to the algae because it feels familiar. We've probably talked about this quite a lot, but you kept moving forward. 12-step programs are the concept of 12-step programs as well runs through, it certainly runs through my work without me knowing, as a coach, without me always knowing explicitly that what I'm using is from 12 steps programs. My coach talks about 12-step programs a lot, picking things out. What was the one with, oh yeah, handing things over to a higher power. Now I'm not a God person anymore, but like just that handing something over to something else, like just, I don't know, whatever. Like, oh, I saw a butterfly today. Okay, hand over something to that butterfly. You know,
I feel like just release it into the universe.
Yeah, it's just
energy
like
that is around you, or
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. And then
here's the kicker, Sarah.
Go on.
The kicker. Would I have had the strength to go through that had I not had a young child that I felt so emotionally responsible for, to be a role model to?
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
There were so many moments along the way where I looked at the fact that, oh my God, if I hadn't had this kid pushing me, what might I have ended up as? Because there was so much. I didn't come from such a positive place when I went into adulthood. Like I didn't like myself. I didn't have a healthy self-image. And I felt also that I was not like suited to, I wanted to live in Tokyo and be like, yes, you know, somebody. But when I started out, obviously I started in education because that was a very practical choice, given the fact that I was a single parent. And, you know, I remember some of the women who were clients of the school, you know, no, they didn't look me in the eye. I was a sub teacher or support teacher until they found out that I had a daughter the same age their kids were. And then suddenly it was like, oh my goodness, Miss Angela. Like I got this respect because I was a mother. And I remember thinking about that going like, how interesting.
Yeah.
Like again, like my curiosity always helped me sort of analyze these things and go, huh, wow, what do you know?
How interesting these female creatures are in their bizarre ways.
Yeah. But in the end, yeah, I did start to grow and notice these moments where I had absolute appreciation for becoming a mother at a young age, even though it was emotionally such a Spartan race.
Yeah, we're going to come to that as well. And you know, there are some schools of thought, if we go back to kind of ancestral lines, and this is just a school of thought, this is not what I believe or anything, which would be that somehow she was sent to you to teach you this, right? And why not? You know, that's one of the paths that I'm quite happy to kind of mix in my super science.
I definitely feel that now.
Yeah. You feel it now. You didn't feel it the day you had birth. Like she's
or
been
the
sent to teach me in 10 years time and rescue me from my from trauma. And another name that came up there in addition to Brené Brown was Gabor Mate, and Gabor Mate does a lot of work around trauma, and he believes that all addictions, and some people would categorize eating disorders in that category.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm no expert in that. I've done some rudimentary research just based on wanting to understand friends better, but so you know, I hand that expertise over to you. But he believes that all addiction or any addictive behavior is based on trauma, and so that's also another, you know, interesting hypothesis too. So moving on. So this is kind of, I think this is about the time when I met you, actually. I think we probably met each other about 9 years ago, around the time of the earthquake. I was then the president of women's or networking or professional networking organization called FEW, for empowering women in Japan. Enter you and one of my board of directors, lovely lady called Hannah, who now lives in Texas, actually, said to me, there's a woman here and she runs this group called OGA for Aid, and you know, so many people say this to you, I thought you were a yoga teacher. Right? When she said it, I was like, I don't even know what she just said. I think it's something to do with yoga. And she said, I think she would be a great partner, strategic partner for the organization, as one of the charity partners or social. Yeah. So I then got to know you at that time, just as you were kind of breaking onto the scene, and as you just described it, becoming somebody in Tokyo, which you really super did. So what happens next? And then of course you become a Spartan. So there's this Spartan race, which if you don't know what the Spartan race is, it's this like super intense obstacle course. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah, obstacle course racing.
Yeah, obstacle course racing, which you are a professional in, one of the elite athletes. So you started to learn how to love your body in this cool water you described. You looked at your arms, you looked at your legs, you're starting to do all, you know, these epiphanies started happening when you were up in, you thought, I'm cured, I'm healed. And then you were like, I'm not. And then you got really on your path. So what's happened in the last 8 years?
So the charity was started, and that's kind of connected to the book. So maybe we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
What happened was, I think it was 2013, because 2011, 2012, it was literally living in Tohoku, right? But yeah. I looked around, you know, as things started to calm just a bit, like we moved out of the chaotic emergency traumatic phase, and it was about, okay, what are these more long-term sustainable programs? I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I looked around at my circle of friends and family and realized I had no one in those circles that I could talk to. I could talk to them, but it would be a very negative conversation, because they would be asking me like, what do you think you're doing? You're not qualified. Don't do it. It's taking a risk. So I decided I needed to go and find other people. And that led me to Few. I don't even remember Hannah's email, but we met for coffee. She took me to a Few event, and it was one of the very rare times that Few would have a male guest speaker, and it was Matthew Dons, and he was talking about startup marketing as a small business. And so not only because we have the networking time, not only did I just walk into this room and go like, oh my goodness, these are women who, if not more advanced than me, are at least at my level, striving, trying, you know, they are unapologetically just being them. And I just felt an affinity. And then Matthew's content was about how to run a small business. And I remember good, clever marketing on Matthew's part. He's like, I can only take 3 students. And I was like, yep, this is me. I need this. And what was interesting was, you know, I grew up always quite poor, or thinking I was poor, that I could never invest in something like this. And even at that moment, I mean, I was getting a small stipend, but there was just something so compelling about finding the right step. If I could get that right idea, I could then, you know, multiply that. The ROI on that would be huge. And I just remember without hesitation raising my hand. And then that started me studying marketing, becoming part of the Few community. And again, just surrounding yourself with people who are mentors and mentees. That also changed my life completely, because I suddenly started to find support and ideas right and left, and being able to feel like you're in a community, your tribe, you know, that strength was just a life changer, really.
Yeah. You know what, Ange, I just made a comment on one of your Facebook calls to action, which was, when somebody tells me what they're doing, I believe them. Right. And it sounds to me like that's what you got there. And I want to make the clear distinction. I did this on your comment as well. I don't believe in them. That's their business, right? That's their business.
Yeah.
I just believe them. Like, so if you say to me, yeah, so we're moving into the next phase of disaster relief, and I think that growing onions in Tohoku is going to be the way to go to help to create some kind of sustainable thing forward. Yeah. Okay. In my mind, that's done. I'm not even like, I'm seeing the onions and stuff like that. Whether you believe in yourself or not, that's your business.
But so something else that really was a profound moment was, we would have these marketing classes, and afterwards we would go for tea or coffee. And I always, even as a young child, and I think it's because my like role models were always these like adventurous women, you know, who did their own thing. I wanted to be and do something because I felt I could, or I should be able to if I wanted to. Like, I felt like, isn't that something we should all be able to do? But I never had the guts to ever actually think I could, and I would never say this out loud. And then one day I was leaving the marketing class and I overheard Matthew behind my back telling someone, that woman, she's going to go places. And I was like, oh, do you think so too? Like this. And so sometimes, you know, you do need someone else to tell you, you've got this, you know, that whole grit MBA thing, someone else saying like, Ange, what you're doing right now, this is something people spend 6-8 years studying. Just keep doing it. And that encouragement, that support, I think we all need it at certain times. And that was one of the moments that was just like needle mover. I was like, well, if you think so, fine. That gives me the courage to say it out loud, and to say, yeah, that's what I want. Even before it happens.
Yeah, those like overhearing, or when somebody introduces you, like take notes, you know, make people feel like rock stars. I really love that, and it's something that I love to do as well, is just to really, I can remember somebody introducing me as the one to watch or something like that, and I was like, oh, like, and I believed them. I was like, I didn't have that sense at that time.
They often say people live up to the expectations you give them. And so in a positive way, when you believe in people, like what you say, it just gives people that space to believe in themselves too, because it isn't something, I mean, I think we're born with it, but then
a bit of evidence, right?
It basically gets like sort of squeezed out of us by the time we get out of this, you know, confusing and complexing phase that is adolescence, and all the well-meaning but bitchy people who have our best interest in mind but do their best to crush it unknowingly.
Yeah, and we've probably done it ourselves as well at some point, you know.
Oh yes, definitely.
So sorry to all the people out there who have ever been crushed by anything that we've said. We believe in you.
But that was an interesting aspect of the culture of Few, was that there was no, well, do you think that will really work? And what's your business plan for that? The conversation,
no.
Amazing. Wow. Like that kind of supportive community, I cannot recommend more to anyone else starting out. I do think you need a tribe.
I do too. And I think like one of my keywords for any group that I form is elevate. So whether that's like a coaching group, or it's the clothes swaps, like I want everybody to feel like they have my full attention. My best mates at the clothes swaps know not to take my time, because I want to see the people who have come, they get to see me outside. And so like, I just want people to feel like I am so glad that they're there. And I am, like, I genuinely am. And like, just feel like rock stars, because when you're trying on clothes, you need to feel like rock stars, don't you?
Yes.
And it's deliberate, but it's also genuine. But it's deliberate, and there's a vigilance to it, and there's a professional level to it. We've been talking about that as well, like really stepping up and being a professional. So fast forward then to now then, Ange, because so just tell us how the concept. So let me rewind a little bit here. So you and I know this about disaster relief because we were at the well, I wouldn't say the heart. Well, you were at the heart of it. Neither of us lost our homes or any of that stuff that the people in Tohoku who you serve did, but we experienced that earthquake in a big way, and we also understand the phases of disaster relief. So there's immediate. Can you just take us through those phases just very quickly?
So you have the immediate relief.
Yes.
And they call them first responders, and these are
typically first responders,
your firemen, your police, your military, and very rarely you'll have like professional first responders who are citizens, but that is their profession, you know, how to scale a house and rescue somebody, or to clean rubble up without potentially finding bodies, just to be quite frank.
Which happens.
It always happens. And then about 6 months in, you move into long-term community rebuilding. But
after about 6 months.
After
So
about
that's,
6
and that's
months.
things like shelters, food, sanitary ware, nappies, toilet paper, all that stuff. Yeah.
That's all emergency.
That's emergency.
That's
And then after
emergency.
6 months.
So you have the teams that I just mentioned who are working on finding the lost bodies, building the lifelines again. So food and water and electricity and gas usually comes later, but those like immediate needs in order to communicate.
Yeah.
On the ground. And then you have about 2 months later, and it's also part of emergency phase, but it's more like clothes, band-aids, medicine, nappies, where are they living? Because most survivors will then be put into the big temporary homes, not temporary, the emergency shelters. And emergency shelters, gymnasiums or tents or things, those will last from up to 6 months, potentially even longer, sometimes months. And this is, us all camping out in a gymnasium. Very, very traumatic for the emotional side. And especially if then you're someone who suffers from some sort of sickness. Then we move into long-term community building. And that alongside with that comes economic enhancement. So can people get their own jobs back up and running so that they can start to rebuild themselves? Do they need handouts? Do they need subsidies? Do they need loans? Like what sort of support can you be helping? And that's definitely something that is mixed. Government, of course, is definitely involved in that. Local prefectures. There's a lot of, social structures in place that are meant to support people on these aspects anyway, your welfare, etc. And then comes the community rebuilding long-term. And this will take decades. So that's where we moved into in 2015. How do you help communities who have been completely devastated, emotionally traumatized, economically, disabled?
Devastated, yeah.
Who and how do you need to rise? How should they connect? And how do they rebuild? And what struck me profoundly in 2014, when we were just sort of the preliminary stages to community building, was I read a report about the Indonesian tsunami. They were hitting their 10th mark in 2014. And in the report, the biggest, most still needed area was emotional support. There were still cases of suicide, depression, alcoholism, and otherwise despondent and disconnected communities. And I know that this is a more difficult subject than just putting up power lines, but it is the one that we do not talk about long-term. In 2011, June, I had the very fortunate moment to meet a gentleman who had worked 30 years for the American Federal Emergency Management Agency, set up by President Carter. And, these are the most professional team in the world, because it's the only country that really has that large a designated team to disaster management. And he was just nodding along. And I was like, at one point I stopped and I was like, are you telling me that all these problems I'm explaining to you now, we have seen before? We've seen before, not only once, twice, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, but we have not done anything as a society to change. Like, we have innovated every other, aspect of our lives, our phones, our wallets, our computers, but disaster management and community rebuilding has had no innovation. And he sadly was like, this is the case. So the way we're approaching it from a government perspective is the same way we were approaching Kobe or, Haiti. And I just thought it just blew my mind.
Right. Right.
What? Okay.
And so what did that prompt you to do? Because your company is I could keep calling it a company. Is it a company? Is it an organization?
It's an organization. It's a small business. It's just registered as a nonprofit. So we don't have
it's registered. Okay. So it's called Place to Grow.
It's called Place to Grow.
So you transitioned over. You got the Japan market entry competition, didn't you? To to help you with that project. Is that right?
Oh, the JMAC.
Yes.
Yes.
To help you to transition your name over. Yeah.
Exactly. To transition the name over, and also to identify a more sustainable model, because obviously in the beginning we were just running off of donations and reports, right? As long as we were transparent and showing them what they were doing, everything was running well. And that was my role, was to identify the problems and then share it with people who wanted to support, so it could be pinpoint. But when we moved into community rebuilding long term, I asked the local people, what do you need? And they said, our houses have been rebuilt, or there's a schedule for it. Electricity's back, but they were like, "Toriaezu soba ni itte kudasai." So please just don't leave our sides. And it blew my mind, because I was like, what? Like, really? Me?
Okay, you're done now. Bye. That feeling. They didn't want that. They wanted to feel like there was some long, that this wasn't just a thing you came in to do to be the saviors and then out.
And I was curious, why is that so important to you? And so that prompted me to start Place to Grow. We decided to focus on children's workshops and larger programs like the Santa Soul Train that would bring people together.
Tell us more about that. So this is a big Christmas party that you throw, right? Every year for hundreds and hundreds of kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
And families. I love that smile, and their families, and you have these chocolate fountains, and you have this like television guy, this like, is it Stuart
dancing and Stuart O from
dancing,
NHK,
singing.
yes.
They all kind of know him from NHK, so it's like thrilling for them, like having a celeb there. Loads of people are involved, and every year, it's, to me, this is memory making.
Yes.
And just so you know, those little moments you were talking about from your childhood, I'm getting goosebumps now, where you were saying like, we went and got like Baskin Robbins from the 7-Eleven, or you went on the Romantica with your dad and had orange juice and stuff. That's their version of this, or one of their versions of this. Tell me where I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The reason this started was because at the end of 2011, you know, it was just, the whole town was, you could feel it. It was depressed, you know. So
which town, hon?
This was in Minami Sanriku.
Minami Sanriku, devastated.
Sendai, yeah. And I mean, our community was Minami Sanriku and some of the neighboring towns like Ishinomaki and Kisunuma, but we were based in Minami Sanriku. And it was just so difficult. Like, you know, the everyday stressors were so tough. And I related to that, you know, like, I guess you've heard some of my background. I related to this idea of having to be a survivor, having to face a life where you know, you don't know what's going to happen. How am I supposed to rebuild? Where am I going to get the emotional strength from that? And clearly it was through each other. And we saw this, but we also saw that many gaps were starting between people, and people were starting to fight. So again, drawing on my own favorite family experiences growing up, which was the holidays, I decided to throw a Christmas party, and everybody danced and sang, and they had turkey for the first time. And I thought that was wonderful. And then a year later, they approached me going, "Oh, Angela, we want to do this again." And from 175 people from the first year, second year, 450 people showed up. And we charged, you know, not much, but everybody contributed a little bit to make it sustainable. And it just became the most heartwarming, brilliant environment I've ever been in. And not where people like coming to perform for them. And this is a really important aspect of humanitarian aid, is that they need to also be given the opportunity to stand up and give back. You know, a lot of people don't get this. They think we just want to continue giving to them.
No.
They are kawaiso. They are the victims.
Kawaiso means?
It means like we feel sorry for them.
Yes.
Right. They are the victims. But if you see them as victims, they see themselves as victims. And you and I probably both know, if you choose to stay in a victim mentality, you will never overcome the challenges. So part of our role as outsiders is to provide spaces where we can't do everything. So we have to ask them to fulfill. Step up, stand up, and let's do it together. And so the girls, like the young dance troupes who perform, the moms told me, like, they never get to perform in front of this many people. So there's that orange juice moment, right? Like, I'm 15.
And also it's that elevation moment as well. It's like, oh, you have a dance troupe. we believe you. Okay, on you go,
Yes.
perform.
Yes.
And then that makes them feel like they're performers as well. Incredible, Ange, incredible. And yeah, so let's move into this then. So what you did was you wrote this as a kind of manual for your people in your NPO, Place to Grow, so you could take on more of the kind of executive role and not be constantly in the weeds trying to help them to do things. And this book was published very quickly. You just did it very quickly. It took 4 days, 8 weeks, 38 years, as your speech that you gave last week said. And this is like 8 principles that will make you an effective leader in social impact. And it's smashing. And what I love about it, and this is so in line with why we're here today talking, is it's storytelling. It gives you these things, but it's also storytelling in action, which not only lends it credibility, but it also, you know, we're talking about ancestry at the top of this call. That's the kind of ancestral way to pass on stories. Before everybody was literate 100 years ago, it was all verbal. So, you know, this is a really fascinating read. So why don't you take us through the 8 principles? Just tell us what they are for starters. If you don't know them off the top of your head, I can prompt you. I hope you've got your book there, Ange.
I do. It's actually it's propping up my microphone.
Yay. Okay.
But yes, no. So it starts. There's 8 principles, and then a takeaway. So as you mentioned, I wrote this specifically to help the next generation of leaders in my organization become more autonomous, you know, be able to lead in their own right. But then also I realized that probably it could benefit anyone who wanted to work in humanitarian aid, social impact. As I mentioned, you know, my shock at finding out that there was so little innovation in this industry, I just feel like the time for massive disruptive innovation in humanitarian aid is coming. And so the very first one is you matter when you choose to. And the takeaway from that is that if you're going to do something that will benefit you and others, please think mostly about how it's going to benefit you, because it's going to be the journey of that will keep you going. So don't do it for the maybe immediate external validation. Don't do it because you'll get your face in the newspaper. Don't do it because people will thank you. Do it because there's a need, but you will become a different person through it. That's kind of my message through that. It's just, and if you
love it,
anything, it could be dance, it could be music, it could be fashion, but you're going to have to choose to matter to it, because no one's going to go, here is a huge problem, why don't you step up and solve it, right?
Love it, love it, love it, love it. One of my great mentors who I'm learning from at the moment, Dr. Frantonia Pollens, she talks about this as well. So she's a committed anti-racist worker, and she says, don't do it for anybody else, don't do it to save anybody, do it for yourself, because it's something that you need to do. And it just shifts the perspective so much. And it takes a lot of humility to do that, I think, actually, because it's very easy to go, I'm so generous and giving. Like, that's kind of the blueprint we receive. But
yes, that's the stereotype.
I'm going to do this for myself. Do you know what I mean? So I love it, Ange. You're on brand for the current kind of wave of learning and developing. All right, number 2.
So number 2 is, it's all about the details, but I like to just say it's the devil is in the details. And this was, there were so many things that I learned through doing that completely like went contrast to what I thought. But the takeaway of the stories in The Devil is in the Details, and when you find out that, you know, without knowing those details, you might not be able to solve some of the problems, but the beauty is that if you know those details, that's where all the solutions are hidden, right? So the takeaway for this one is also that creating spaces for other people to choose empowerment might be one of the greatest gifts you could ever give another human. And I learned this because a lot of times in, definitely with corporate or with work, business, you don't want to make mistakes, right? You want to do things perfectly because people want to see you as an expert, or you want to be seen as an expert. But if you take that approach in humanitarian aid, you will perpetuate ongoing dependency. So you almost have to, on purpose, integrate mistakes into your implementation, so that the receiving side of people can go, you know, I can do that better. And that gives them that step to go in there. And then, as I mentioned, the other thing was that the details of the problem will show you how to make those spaces.
And you can't do it. There has to be involved the people who are there. My favorite story in the book is in here, which is about when some US organization had donated lots of tins of chili, and so you distributed it, and you were like, yeah, and somebody opened it and was like, is this dog food? And so when you say you're perpetuating something, it's like people who have already lost so much and so much dignity now think you're feeding them dog food. It's like a simple conversation or a simple kind of step back, and I'm sure the chili was delicious and it was a very kind, well-meaning thing, but that detail, you wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know that. That opened my eyes so much to so many things, of just not assuming things. It's such a good, and this is what I love about this book, is all the you know, the stories are so good, and there's photographs in here as well, on the ground level, and and you know, there's all these stories. Okay, so let's move on to the third principle.
I normally don't like books with pictures in them, but there were so many aspects that I just could not explain in words.
Well, there's a self-limiting belief to question. I'm the kind of person who doesn't like books with pictures in. We'll work on that. Like,
I've had that illusion.
To humble yourself to this one, because it's really useful, actually. It's very useful.
Yeah.
Because it builds the picture for people as well. And it's not so dry. Okay, the third one.
Third one is competition versus camaraderie.
Okay, and the takeaway?
The takeaway for this one was a common goal brings people together. So you are always going to have to be dealing with people at odds, right? And everyone's got their own opinion about things.
Yeah.
But if your goal can be bigger than any of them, people will just naturally come together. I think there's something hardwired in us. And so I urge you as leaders to use that rather than call the little problems. And then another thing on the other takeaway was establish the commander's intent, which is, it's actually a military term, but I found it so useful, which is the core reason. Make sure that everyone on your team, and you can apply this across any organization, what is the core purpose for why you're there? So in our organization, inspire and connect. So if we have a plan, a mission, everything goes to shit, the cars break down, this, that, or the other, at least I know when I engage that local person, my job is to inspire and connect with that person. And that gives you just, you know, because the plans are always going to change and things are always going to bother you. But if you have if you establish the commander's intent, then I think you can empower a much more effective organization.
Okay, so principle number 4, why inclusion in support is vitally important.
People, more than wanting to be right or win, I believe they want to be heard. And so in this story, the stories I talk about here, the takeaway is that having differences is not the problem, because contrast is here in life for us to grow, and without variables, there's no opportunity for that. So real inclusion can be achieved when people feel heard. So when you can, because we had so many different peoples with different backgrounds and even neighbors that identify with different cultures, and they would just want to fight because they're in the forest, right? But when we were able to say, honestly, unfortunately, those don't matter because we have this bigger goal up here, they can all go, oh, okay. And it worked so smoothly. And I think this one's actually really relevant for what's happening right now in the world, and how leaders can maybe use that idea of inclusion, not as checking boxes for how many different colored people we have in our office, or, you know, how many types of women and men in the in-betweens that we have working together, but actually look at differences as so valuable, but people need to feel heard, not told your idea doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what does my ego have to do with it? Number 5.
Take away, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. And then the hardest one of all, don't let it get to you.
Ah! Oh,
that one is really tough.
So hard.
So
hard. Very, I mean, it's just like humility runs throughout this.
But
and as
what
you know,
I
I
learned
believe
through
humility.
this, what I learned through this was that, you know, the not letting it get to you. I think, especially those of us that kind of grow up with the old school sort of Christian ideas, that turn the other cheek has a very, it's like a very a submissive feeling to it. But I learned that no. When you don't let it get to you, you are being strategic about where you put your focus and energy.
Yeah, don't be distracted. That's what.
Yeah,
don't be distracted.
But that blew my mind. I was like, oh my
devoted.
God.
Amazing. All right, fail forward successfully. You've already mentioned this. This is you're always talking about this.
So you don't. People are afraid of failure because they are afraid of what other people will think of them, right? Mm-hmm. But fail small and fail often. In the way you might work out, for example, get sore muscles, then you strengthen your operating system, basically, right? The operating system muscles. And then you are progressing steadily forward. Don't wait until you're going to have like a huge failure to where it's going to take months and months to recuperate.
Yeah.
Just do them small.
Yeah, brilliant. Take care of yourself so you can take care of others. So important. I mean, self-care is a buzzword, but we have to look after ourselves. And again, this is another one that Dr. Frantonia Pollins talks about all the time. We have to self-care. We have to drink water. We have to hydrate.
So I want people to talk about this side more. You know, and well, for me growing up, physical fitness was always associated with vanity
Wow. Okay.
And, you know, if you're either really, really sexy and that's why you're a fitness person, or you're the person that tries for 2 weeks and then is always making jokes about why you can't keep up with it. But what I discovered going through my eating disorder is that physical fitness is paramount to good mental health. As much as it is important to maintaining, like, you know, an agile and mobile, sustainable body to live in, healthy, it is so important for your mind. And that's why I put that in there, because through my own experiences, I realized, you know, physical fitness is also a massive antidote to depression.
Wow. And finally, number 8, people inspire people and you benefit from inspiring others. I love this, Ange, so much. Everything in here is about like looking at what's good for you and what's good for others as well. And I you know, it's just such a great reminder to not be attached or addicted to the idea that you have to be endlessly generous in order to be valued. One way. Yeah. Another kind of very kind of Christian Catholic ideal, certainly another ideal. But I just love it. Go ahead.
So, I mean, you just explained the takeaway right there, but I'll tell you a story about, I think maybe one of the first reasons I realized this was we were arriving back in Minamisanniku, 2011. This was March still. And we arrived very late. So we had to go around the mountain. And when we arrived, the staff from the hotel had waited up for us. And they were waiting up for us with a tray, each of, you know, like a tray with rice and miso soup and some tsukemono. And this blew my mind because I was like, no, we're coming in here to help you. How are you here all waiting? And smiles on their faces. And my Japanese colleague flipped the fuck out. He was like, no, this is wrong. We cannot eat this food. No. And I was like, okay, first of all, look at their faces, how excited and happy they are to see us. This was not the same place that I walked into last week.
No, and it's not his decision.
And eat their food, and you know what? We're going to tell them this is the best goddamn rice we've ever tasted. And honestly, we were starving. So it was but I stood there for a moment going like, okay, this is also not what I expected, but clearly something else is going on that's inspiring them. It's not the truck of futons and apple boxes that we're bringing, although they need that. It was that human connection. It was that we're there. And that just blew my mind. And then after that, I have hundreds of other stories where I realized, you know, it wasn't the 12,000 tons of supplies. It was the fact that Ange kept showing up and saying, are you okay? Here's some more water. You know, that reoccurring connection of caring about somebody else.
Yeah,
absolutely. It gave them the strength to keep going and gave them.
Absolutely.
And it blew my mind.
Beautiful. I mean, it's interesting. We were just talking about this yesterday. Of course, you know, for anybody who's living in Japan at that time, that earthquake was there's before and there's after. You know, there was like, it adjusts you at a cellular level somehow, not just because the fear is so raw, like not the fear of like being left out or not being invited to an event or something like that, but the raw fear of being like, I'm going to die immediately. And then like aftershocks are just more earthquakes. P.S. It's not like a it's another earthquake after another earthquake after another earthquake. Now I was experiencing that in Tokyo. These people are experiencing up there as well. So it often comes up in conversation is what where I'm going with this. And last night it came up in conversation, and we were talking about a fish called sanma, which is a long silver fish. It's very delicious and loved here.
Lots of bones.
And in 2012, the people of Onagawa and Ishinomaki came down to Tokyo, and in Hibiya Park, which is just near where the government buildings are, they held a big Sanma festival. And this wasn't to promote Tohoku food. It was to say thank you to Tokyo for the aid that they gave. And this is perfectly in line with what you're saying here. It's that sense of like, that reciprocity thing comes in, and and that's their decision to make. Like, it was just so humbling and so lovely. Yeah, amazing. So Ange, thank you. You can find this on Amazon. Is that right?
Yes, just type in Principles, Place to Grow.
I'm sorry, an Audible version as well. Oh no, an e-version as well, right?
E-version. The Audible book should be, I'm working on it, so it should be available in a few months.
Are you voicing that?
I think so, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to start to close out now, Ange. So why don't you tell us about your new venture then that's coming up?
So Stratechist is the name of this new brand.
Stratechist.
Yes. Play on the words strategy and techniques, because I want to share both with aspiring entrepreneurs. And it doesn't have to be in social impact, but I find that if you're going to have a business, you're going to impact society and environment anyway. So I want to share how you can leverage both those aspects, not only to sell more products or services, not only for your success, but also to then have a positive impact on the environment and the society. Because I believe that when you look at these three things, people, planet, profit equally, you have more success. And finances or success or profit is an end result.
People, planet, profit. That's the, we call that the triple bottom line,
yes.
Okay, yeah.
When you think of those as one key thing that you need to focus on, you need to have in order to have a sustainable business, finance or profit, wealth, this is the outcome. It's not the goal in and of itself, right? So if you're doing your thing to the best of your ability, the quality, then money will come. You're not supposed to start the business and go, okay, we're just going to make money. You're there to solve a problem. And I read this great thing the other day. It was like, so if you want to be a millionaire, how are you going to positively impact 1 million people's lives? And I thought, so I do also want to flip the switch, because, a lot of people to date have been under the impression that if you want to do good in the world, you should not want to pursue wealth, financial wealth,
It's the most damaging concept ever, that keeps
very damaging.
Very generous, very sensitive, very loving people poor.
And if you want to be financially wealthy, you need to be an asshole. Is these
Nonsense.
these
Nonsense.
ideas that were perpetuated throughout these decades of humanity? And I would really love to flip the switch on that. I would love to encourage and mentor startup. I think I have 8 years, 38 years, 8 weeks and 3 days of really sort of hard-won victories that would be my contribution. And so with Stratechist, I do workshops and masterminds for people who really want to get started up. And we'll start with the mindset of how do you love yourself? How do you believe in yourself? How do you know that, how do you get that confidence to say, I'm not, please, could you buy my thing? But no, it's my responsibility to share this with the world because only I can. And then going back to what I mentioned, Sir Ken Robinson talking about how it is a miracle that each of us are alive. He says this amazing thing about how, an entire gajillion different particles and little connections had to happen for the expression of every person.
Yeah, like protein, oops, DNA.
So each person is unique. And I know it's a trendy thing that's been said, but if you really sit with that for a moment and think that I have a very unique and perspective upbringing experience in life, so only I am going to be the one to be able to say this the way it's being said. And I want more people to discover that.
Love it. And you know what, the reason why that's, I think you just mentioned the word cliche or something like that, is because it's true, but it doesn't settle in until it's like previous people say it, like, you have your own unique, you have the thing that you can bring into the world. I think it's one of Marie Forleo's things. It's like, actually, and then when you realize that, it's very freeing because it frees you up to be humble enough to actually put your stuff out into the world, which is horrifying, isn't it?
It's very scary.
It's terrifying. And let's be perfectly honest about that, Angela. You and I, on the surface are those people who people may in Tokyo or wherever who know us be like, wow, she's so strong. Do you know what I mean? Without knowing the backstory, without knowing the conversations that we have, without knowing the tears, without knowing all that stuff. And I don't think that we should have to prove that in any ways. I think we should be able to, show up as fully formed people as we are. And you can just make the assumption, by the way, that we have a nervous system, we shit ourselves on the regular, and I'm sorry, that's so disgusting, but what I mean? Like we are, like, what you see here is the result of a lot of work in the background. You can just assume that. I don't have to feed that to you. I don't have to show you how vulnerable I am. You don't get to feast on that unless I decide that. I feel very strongly about this, as you can see. So bravo to you for getting this out into the world. I was like, 1 minute we were talking about it and the next the book was there and I was like, how did that happen? Amazing. So I want to close out now, Angela, and say thank you very, very, very much. I love the book. Thank you for giving me a little mention in here. That was so humbling.
Absolutely.
So delightful. And I want to just, what my thing is for this is I call, if you're watching or listening to this, how are you going to impact 1 million people in the world? You don't have to touch each one of them because, there's 3 people sitting behind, there's an exponential amount of things, but what's the thing that you're going to do to impact 1 million people? I love this idea, and I'm thinking about that right now myself. You've just reignited that spark inside of me. But what would be your thing that you would love to leave people with, Ange?
Well, I would like to not invite people, but the way I would hope to, I guess, touch 1 million people's lives is to say you don't need to walk on eggshells around who you are. Just step up and own it. Like, once you can own your life, then there's this freedom that like, there's all this stress, and I definitely learned this through my eating disorder, and I want to help people get to that point. but I'm not a coach, you know, so I'm not going to approach this from a training period. I want to do it from a more practical sense, and then help them identify that, look, connect these dots for you. It's like, it's what I had to do, right? Mind map, or like life mapping, go back, look behind and say, not in spite of what happened to you, because of that, look at these options. And I guess that's what I will put into Stratechist. And I hope through Stratechist and through these workshops, I can touch 1 million people's lives.
Beautiful. Where can people find you, Angela?
At www.stratechist.com.
Gorgeous. And where can we find this? I've said it's on Amazon.
You can find this on Amazon. You can also find this on the organizations workshop, which is placetogrow/ngo.org.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Thank you. And so I would highly encourage people to go and buy it, read it, digest it, post about it online.
Also,
hashtag place to grow, hashtag.
There are journaling spaces for you as the reader to keep your own notes. So this should not be a pristine, clean book. It should be bent edges. It should be scratched up. It should be at the bottom of your backpack.
Yay.
That's what I hope.
And I absolutely love it. There's so much in here, and it's not just about disaster relief. It's about how to lead a life. And there are many ways to lead a life. Everybody has stories. I want to tell them. Thank you so much for sharing your story so generously today, Ange. I absolutely loved it, learned so much, and I will see you soon. The next interview will be coming soon. So thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I had so much fun.
Yes, amazing.